This is for your notes on page 55, 54, and 55. On page 54, you can see the names and descriptions of 4 features found along coastal landscapes. On page 55, you can see a diagram that we're going to draw those features on. So on page 55, this area here is representing land, and then this represents the ocean over here. These squiggly lines represent waves that are pushing up against the shore. Waves are caused by wind. Tides are caused by the moon. Tsunamis are caused by landslides and earthquakes. And then these waves that just crash on the shore are caused by wind. So the wind blows these waves and the waves hit the shore. So we're going to look at some features associated with coastlines. The first thing I want to talk about before we talk about the actual depositional features is talk about how sand and sediment moves along a coastline. We can see here as these waves strike the shore, they don't strike the shore perpendicular. The waves are hitting at a slight angle. When that happens, that causes the sand grains to push up the beach at a different angle that they come back down at. So the sand grains will push up because of the waves at one angle, but then the backwash will bring it back perpendicular to the shore. So the sand grain gets pushed in this direction, falls back here, gets pushed in this direction, falls back here. So a sand grain that starts in one part of the beach will get transported to another part of the beach. Let's throw that into our diagram here. If we zoom into an area, let's get a sand grain. It starts right there. Let's just focus just on one sand grain. That sand grain is going to get pushed by the waves up the beach and then back down. It gets pushed up the beach, then back down. It gets pushed up the beach, then back down. And so now we had a sand grain that was here, that sand grain is now here. We call that movement of sediment along the coastline longshore transport. So this longshore transport, where sediment moves along the shoreline by the longshore current, is happening right here. It's not just that one sand grain, but it's all the sand on the beach. So the beaches are constantly moving. Sometimes that sand might get washed out further. So when it gets pushed up, it might actually get washed out even further. And some other sand might get washed out further. And one of the features that we can form is an island that is parallel with the coastline. If enough of this sand builds up, that island can become quite significant, to the point where we build towns and cities on them. These islands are known as barrier islands, and if you look at page 54, you'll see that's one of the features found along a coastline is a barrier island. If that sand grain stays close to shore and continues to move down the shoreline, it might hit a little piece of land like this. So now that sand grain gets pushed out into the ocean from the shoreline, and more sand grains get pushed out, and more sand grains get pushed out, and more sand grains pushed out. So we have a little peninsula of land that sticks out from the shore. Both of these features, the barrier island and this feature, which is called the spit, are natural features. They form naturally, as opposed to the next two, the groin and the jetty, which are man-made features. Let's take a look at some barrier islands and spits. So here you can see where a barrier island will form off the coastline. So here's the coastline and the ocean, and then the barrier island will build up right there. I mentioned that Long Island was formed by glacial deposition. But there's one part of Long Island, and that's this long, skinny piece of land here that's formed by the waves. So as waves crashed into this pile of sediment, some of those sediments got pulled out further and were deposited as a barrier island. Some of these barrier islands get pretty big, like we can see here, and they can be built on. If we take a look at Long Island, we know that this is all glacial material, but we can see that there's a long barrier island along the south shore that's formed by waves. Another famous one is the Outer Banks in the Carolinas, where we see this long island that's just sand. And again, certainly long enough that we can build on it. During times of severe weather and hurricanes, it can be dangerous because all of this is just sand. There are two features that we're going to draw on here that are man-made features. And one of them helps us prevent the sand from getting in the way of a harbor. Sorry, there's the spits that we talked about earlier. And that's called a jetty. So let's take a look at this harbor here. You might imagine a ship coming into harbor and it's unloading some cargo that's going to be taken away by rail, or maybe a truck's taking that cargo away. Well, if we have sediment that's constantly being transported this way, it might fill up the front of that harbor. If we have sand that's constantly being transported, we might get a situation like this, where the sand now blocks the entrance to that area where you want to go. Well, what we can do to prevent that sand from sliding over and blocking that is we could simply build a wall. We could use concrete. Maybe we just take a bunch of rocks, a metal wall, and we build this, and what happens is the sand will then fill up behind this barrier and get trapped here instead of moving there. The longshore transport can change direction. So maybe if the wind starts blowing in another direction, we might move the sand this way. So we'll need another one of these features here. This is known as a jetty. Here we can see a jetty on Long Island. Excuse me. That's allowing navigation from the ocean out into this bay. And there we have the two jetties that have been built to block that sand. And sure enough, we can see a big collection of sand here, which would suggest that the majority of the longshore transport would be in this direction, since we could see more of the sand being trapped there. So this is just, and if we zoom in close, we can see that's really just a pile of rocks that are there to trap the sediment in place to prevent it from covering the inlet. there's our jetty, concrete. They can be wide enough to drive on. They're there to help us navigate or move through the water. The other feature is a groin. And groins are also built to trap sediment, but not necessarily for transport into a harbor, but just on the shoreline if we want to trap some sand. So if we build these jetties here, if we build these groins here, we'll see that they're going to trap the sand on that side. Here we can see a groin built out into the ocean. And notice that the sand is built up more, trapped more on this side. Therefore, the longshore current is in the direction of the arrow. Here we see a number of groins built together to trap sediment. In the background, we can see where there are no groins, or few, and we can see that there's not a lot of beach in this area. But where there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different groins, we can see that it's trapped a large amount of sediment. This, 1, protects the land, in this case protecting the road. 2, also gives you a larger beach. So we've drawn some jetties here. Let's draw some groins over here. I might have a house in this area. I paid a lot of money for my beach house, so I want to make sure that it's protected and I have a good beach here. But this sand, we know, is not going to stay here. That sand is going to move. Well, maybe I'll build a groin here to trap that sand. So now if the longshore current is in this direction, the sand gets transported and is now going to get trapped on this side. And that gives me a larger beach in front of my house. My neighbor's not too happy about that. My neighbor's like, hey, that sand that you just trapped was supposed to come and build my beach. Well, I'm going to do the same thing then. I'm going to build a groin to trap that sand, what little sand is coming left. The same reason. And we could do that all the way down the shoreline like we see here. You can see one after another of these groins being built along the shoreline. That helps keep the sand here. And if there's beaches there, then there will be people there. And if there's people there, well, then my tourist dollars stick around as well. After a while, these groins might need to be rebuilt. We can see this one looks like it's kind of falling apart a little bit, and maybe it needs to be dug out and add some more rocks to it to trap even more of that soil. All right, there's our notes on coastal landscapes.